Hello, I'm Peter and welcome to part 1 of my Tekken 7 guide on pressuring with Bryan Fury. Previously in this series we talked about Bryan's space control game plan, how to zone out your opponent, establish pressure, and counter hit all from space control attacks. Since Bryan's pressure game is a bit unconventional, I'll be breaking this video into multiple parts. This video will cover how his pressure works, and just a quick preface, this is an ongoing series, so if you haven't been following along, if you want to get caught up to speed, I'll be adding a link to the description, or rather just the comments below, a playlist. And another thing, this guide is geared towards beginner Bryan players, so for the most part I'll only be talking about the moves I covered in the 101 Fundamentals video. His other moves will not be covered here, as I think what I covered in the 101 Fundamentals video is plenty to get Bryan players started. So without further ado, let's go! Understanding pressure. So Bryan's pressure looks pretty simple on the surface. People look to attacks like chopping elbow, his back 1, and hatchet kick, quarter circle back 3, and say, oh, just use this to start your pressure and then harass your opponents with his other attacks. But if we want to dive a little deeper, we'll realize that he's rather unorthodox and can have trouble starting pressure and keeping momentum going. And this is in part because of 5 reasons. Reason number 1, he has no standard down forward 1. A lot of characters have a 13 or 14 frame mid poke that's somewhere between 0 to about -3 on block. And this can be used quite liberally to check crouching opponents or even standing opponents. Instead, I should have turned my phone off. Instead, Bryan has a down forward 2 mid poke that starts up in 13 frames, but is -6 on block. It does have 2 extensions, but each extension is punishable. 2. No scary lows. I know I'm gonna get some flack for this and some people are gonna disagree with me, but hatchet kick isn't a scary low. If the opponent has a lot of health, it's honestly not that scary. It comes out kinda slow, gives just okay frames on hit, and it really doesn't knock down unless on counter hit. A smart player will not needlessly try to low block or low parry this attack, since Bryan's mid attacks are far more dangerous. 3. Slow pressure starters. 2 of his main pressure starters, chopping elbow and hatchet kick, both come out in 20 frames and 21 frames respectively out in the open. This can be easily stuffed, or worse yet, counter hit. The attacks are pretty slow to come out in for what? 3 frames on block for chopping elbow and 4 frames on hit for hatchet kick? 4. Somewhat difficulty in getting in. Because Bryan is so great at playing keep out and is a mid-range monster, he can actually struggle to get in on characters that keep him out. Bryan does have advancing attacks, but many of them are either very minus on block or push the opponent away. Getting in on opponents requires some level of mind game and quite a bit of movement. And number 5, lackluster throw game. Bryan has 2 command throws. That's great, but both are broken with 1+2. He has an incomplete throw game, so even players who guess on throw breaks have a 50-50 chance to break it. And against better players, this becomes even less useful. Now, Bryan definitely has more reasons why he is unorthodox when it comes to pressure, but after listing the 5 reasons, I think many of you get the point. So with that, one of the most requested questions from viewers is, how do I pressure with Bryan? Lots of people are having trouble opening up opponents with Bryan, and when they do, they're scared of getting hit out of their pressure. Due to his unorthodox pressure game, pressuring with Bryan requires 2 main things, alright? 1, it's going to require mind games, and 2, it's going to require commitment. You know what, I'm gonna say it again, but word it a little differently so you understand it better. When pressuring with Bryan, don't autopilot. And 2, don't be a pussy. Mind games. Now, the mind games aspect of Bryan's pressure is really what allows Bryan to keep the foot on the gas. Because attacks such as down forward 1, down forward 2, 1+2, etc., are all fairly minus on block, the mind game comes in the form of whether or not strings are finished. Take something like machine gun blow, down forward 1. This attack is -5 on block for the first hit, and -10 on block for the second, third, and fourth hit. So the attack is punishable. However, if machine gun blow is continued and the opponent guesses wrong, the rest of the strings can be finished and hit confirmed. Well, hit confirmed and then finished. Because of this, a mind game starts immediately with the first iteration of down forward 1. Will there be 1 machine gun punch? Will there be 2? Will there be 3? Will there be 4? If our opponent guesses right, we either punish for this and basically hand over our momentum to the opponent. If our opponent guesses wrong, we get some damage and +1 frame. So let's say our opponent guessed wrong earlier and is no longer looking to guess on machine gun blow. They don't want to eat a bullet at the end of, the whole string. In that case, we can do something like down forward 1, down forward 1 into 1, 2, 3 to land a chip low. What we just did was we took an attack that was -10 on block and basically made it 0, and then exchanged that for momentum and offense. This type of mind game is everywhere in Bryan's attacks, literally everywhere. Alright, I'm going to show one more example to really drive home the point. Take a look at this sequence here. Alright. So what we did is we started off with a 1-2 string that is left unfinished. Our opponent doesn't want to press buttons because he doesn't want to get nailed by a counter hit launcher, such as 1-2-1, or get knocked down by 1-2-3. It's completely reasonable to not press a button here. After 1-2, we're just -2 on block, so pretty safe. But because the opponent doesn't want to challenge, we're essentially 0 on block. Now that he's hesitated to press a button, we can go for something like a down forward 2. Even though now down forward 2 is -6 on block, our opponent doesn't want to press a button in fear of being hit by something like down forward 2-3, which would completely just delete half his health if there's a wall nearby. And of course, this line of logic is reasonable too, not wanting to press after down forward 2. And since he's afraid to press buttons, we can steal yet another action. Despite being at -6, we go for something like a standing 1 jab, which now puts us at +1 frames on block. +1 frame on block. And from here, we can go into something like a quick hatchet quick, which is unseeable, netting ourselves now +4 frames on hit and some damage. In this example, the power of unfinished strings is extremely strong, since a lot of Bryan's last hits and his strings provide either a counter hit launcher or a knockdown. This is where the mind games begins and how momentum can be kept up. A note of caution though, this will not work against opponents who don't know the strings and just love to mash buttons. You can't play mind games with these people, okay? You can't, because they don't know the strings, they're gonna press buttons all the time. In that case, if they wanna press buttons and they wanna challenge us on every single fucking button that we press, for those special individuals, just finish the strings, collect your counter hit launcher. Commitment. Ah, yes. That thing we love and hate. So, Bryan's pressure needs commitment in addition to reads, because a majority of his toolkit only gives around 3 to at most like 6 frames, right? Things like chopping elbow gives +3 on block. Hatchet kick gives +4 on hit. 1-4 gives +4 on hit.
Down forward 2-1 gives +4 on hit. While standing 3 gives +4 on hit. 1-2 gives +5 on hit. Down forward 2 gives +5 on hit. While standing 4 gives +5 on hit. 1-2-1 gives +6 on hit. 2-3 gives +6 on hit. 1+2 gives +6 on hit. Quarter circle back 2 gives +6 on hit.
You get the idea. Now, with just roughly 3 to 6 frames of advantage, we really need to be selective about what attacks we throw out. If we throw out an attack that's too slow, like chopping elbow, we could get counter hit. If we throw out something slow like hatchet kick, we could get straight up counter hit. And if we throw out something like soccer kick, that's also counter hittable, and orbital, we could get floated, or even something somewhat fast like forward 3. We could get counter hit out of that too. However, even if these attacks are too slow, sometimes we should still throw them out if we have a read on our opponent. For example, if we notice our opponent is just stand guarding, right? Just stand guarding and not pressing buttons after hatchet kick, we should just throw out another hatchet kick. Yes, we can most definitely get counter hit and potentially launched for it, but remember, don't be a pussy. If we have a read on an opponent and we scout it out, then go with it. Don't be a pussy. The same thing can be said with something like chopping elbow into hatchet kick. This is not safe nor guaranteed, but if we notice our opponent isn't really challenging us or pressing any buttons, then hatchet kick the shit out of them, right? Break those fucking ankles. Don't be a pussy. Sometimes we have to play with big balls and not be afraid to commit. Remember the example of 1-2 into down forward 2 into standing 1 into hatchet kick? This mind game, this thing is risky, okay? But at the same time, if we notice that our opponent's not pressing buttons and they're patient, then we can go for it. If our opponent calls us out at any point, then we get launched. I mean, this is part of it, right? If you want to be aggressive with Bryan, that's how you're gonna have to play it. Now, I'm not advocating for reckless play. I'm actively activating. What? I'm actively advocating for intelligent play with calculated risks. When we commit with Bryan, we should know what we're risking and why we're risking it. Don't just blindly throw attacks and chain them together, all right? And also, I would like to point out that commitment doesn't necessarily mean throwing out an attack that's potentially counter hit launchable or something that we can get poked out of or punished. Committing can also mean performing an attack that might give up our turn. Let's use 1-2-1 as an example. If we finish the string, if we go for 1-2-1 and we finish the string, we're putting ourselves at -6 on block. There are no follow-ups after this, and we're at -6. So aside from any crazy mind games that you've been playing with your opponent, we're essentially giving up our turn, just here you go, and handing it to our opponent. So finishing strings is also considered a commitment. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for sitting through this. I wanted to this time lay out a skeletal structure, a backbone for Bryan's pressure, to understand how it works, what makes it tick, how to keep momentum, yada yada yada. So with that, look forward next time to exactly Bryan's tools for keeping up with pressure and how to utilize them. I'll talk about how to crack open opponents who love to mash buttons, right? Players who love to just challenge us on everything. How do you pressure somebody like that? Or how to pressure somebody who is super patient, who's just waiting for their turn. So I'll cover that in the next video, as well as specifically his tools. And if you enjoyed this content, I would really enjoy it if you left a comment, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. You know the drill. It's been a pleasure. I'm Peter, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one, guys. See ya.